Gay Report Los Angeles correspondent Marlena Coelho-Suse recently looked into the trials and tribulations of gay adoptions in California. Marlena joins us from LA. Thank you for joining us, Marlena.
It's a pleasure, TJ.
In your investigating piece, you talked to the Southern Adoption Program Director as well as the founder of the Raise a Child Foundation. Can you tell us a little bit about what you learned?
Well, TJ, there are so many children within the foster system that are waiting to be adopted, ready to go to loving and caring homes. And LGBT families can be a part of that process with the help and support of Los Angeles. John Ireland and Rich Valenza, the founders of the Raise a Child campaign, which is designed to encourage LGBT families to adopt, say that the community by itself can solve the problem of over 400,000 children who end up in the overburdened foster homes. Let's take a look. Meet Isaiah Sullivan. He is an 8-year-old boy who, like any other child, has some big dreams.
I want to be a scientist and an actor and a painter and a policeman.
He is one of the many foster children who have been adopted by gay and lesbian parents. Dennis, just like any other father, shares the instant connection he felt with Isaiah.
The minute I saw him, I knew that he was my son.
Dennis, being a single gay man, is part of a growing population of gay and lesbian people who wish to adopt or have successfully done so. Southern California Adoption Program Director Robin Herod, who assisted Dennis with his adoption, shares some statistics.
50% or more of the families who come through my agency are gay and lesbian families. The Williams Institute, which is a national think tank at UCLA, actually has done research, and it shows that there are 2 million gay and lesbian families who want to adopt.
Due to the rising number of LGBT adoptions, nonprofit organizations such as LA's Raise a Child campaign have been established. Raise a Child co-founders John Ireland and Rich Valenza, who've adopted themselves, say that their campaign seeks to encourage the LGBT community to build families through fostering and adoption.
It's really important for LGBT prospective parents to know that the agencies they work with want to work with them. You know, I think there's an assumption that LGBT people are not welcome in foster and adopting in that world. That when you go with a county, for instance, or with a state in some parts of the country, that the government is going to maybe not be interested in our families. We found the exact opposite. Here in Los Angeles, the County of Los Angeles is very eager to recruit and has been working successfully with LGBT families.
For many in the LGBT community, adopting has been a source of public ridicule or concern, especially from those closest to them.
Some relatives in my family, which really surprised me. It was okay to be gay and it was fine. But all of a sudden there's a child now in the mix. That really took a different slant.
I kept the secret from my family because I wasn't sure exactly how they were going to react. And you know, my mother, when I finally did tell her, she was like, you know, I don't know that this is a wise thing for you. I said, why? And she said, because the county is never going to give you a child. You're gay. And, you know, that was the mentality of that generation. And even though we know things are different, it still haunts us, you know.
With that being said, how can Raise a Child encourage the LGBT community to adopt?
The old stereotypes are old and they don't really exist anymore. And we're trying to take it to the level that there are 400,000 kids in the foster care system. 1/4 of those kids are cleared and ready for adoption. And it's been like this for years and years and years. So what we figured is that the LGBT community, if only we can educate them and support them and kind of encourage them along the way, we can take care of that social problem in the United States in foster care.
On our own.
Yeah, just our communities.
Raise a Child's rapidly expanding campaign brought in over 400 prospective LGBT parents. Part of their success is due to their campaign posters showing real LGBT families.
We're real people in the community. You know, gay and lesbian, bisexual, transgender people are part of the fabric of every community. And you know, during the Prop 8 campaign, the issue was don't trigger any of those homophobic responses. Don't put gay men out there with children because people will assume bad things. Whereas we really want to just confront all of that and say, these are real families. These are real success stories. These are people who fostered and adopted to build their families. There is a net gain for society. There's obviously a tremendous net gain for those individuals in the family, the kids and the adults. You can't argue that. You know, like that is the most compelling argument for equality.
So, in your opinion, what are some of the unforeseen difficulties that individuals face when engaging in the adoption process?
In many cases, these individuals face challenges with family members who fervently oppose their decision, as you saw with both Rich Valenza and Dennis Sullivan. And many of them need the courage to take a stand in spite of what those closest to them might think and do what they feel is right. And also, going along with what Rich stated, those past prejudices and hurt feelings still haunt those individuals and may in fact prevent them from having the self-confidence or the desire to raise a family of their own, TJ.
Wow, that's amazing. And what do you think is the biggest misconception about gay couples adopting children?
Well, there might be two biggest misconceptions, one of them being that members of the LGBT community won't make good parents and that the children of these families will come out scarred in some way. However, Robin Herod, the adoption program director, shared some recent findings published from the latest UCLA research study that again reinforces a pre-established fact that LGBT people have an established history of raising successful, healthy, and well-adjusted children. And now another misconception comes from the inside of the community itself. Many LGBT individuals feel that because of their lifestyle, the government is not interested in giving them a child, which according to the Raise a Child campaign is a complete myth. That in fact the government is highly interested and willing to work with the community, TJ.
Well, Marlena, I would like to thank you for bringing this issue to the forefront.
I think it is important to know that there is a need and a desire to work with gay and lesbian couples within the foster system.
There's no doubt about it. Thank you so much, Marlena.
Thank you, TJ.
In international news, following up on a story that we mentioned last week about Nepal's government issuing third gender identification cards for citizens who don't want to identify themselves as male or female but other, our news team in Los Angeles caught up with Kyle Knight, an international photojournalist that had extensively covered the story for several years, and for news organizations like CNN, among others. Elliot, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, TJ. It's good to be here.
After last week's episode, your team tracked down Kyle Knight during his brief visit to Los Angeles just before returning to Nepal. So you guys grabbed your camera and met up with him. So tell us about what you learned.
Well, TJ, we did get the opportunity to meet up with Kyle just hours before his return back to Nepal. We were able to discuss the implementation of a governmentally recognized third gender, as well as the LGBTI movement within Nepal and the surrounding region. Over the course of the discussion, we were able to dig deep and find out why Nepal has been able to pass such progressive legislation, as well as why Nepal has become such a front runner in LGBT rights at an international stage. So here's a look at the interview. So what is third gender? You know, as far as to the Nepali government and the people, you know, one here in the States might think that third gender would be more associated with transgendered peoples or intersex people. But here I have a quote from one of your blogs, and this individual said, "I'm biologically male, but I'm not a man. I do not desire women sexually. Men in my culture desire women sexually. Therefore, I am third gender." So, having heard this quote, here in the States, we would associate someone like this to either be, whether they're male or female, a lesbian female or a gay male, because they desire the same sex. So,
the third gender in Nepal, I think it's important to think about it as a third gender, not a definitive third absolute. What they've tried to do is create it as a somewhat fluid category based solely on self-identification. And the story really begins, legally speaking, in 2007. They had a monumental Supreme Court decision then that came down, and the judges in that decision basically granted them the rights that are enshrined in the Yogyakarta Principles, which are the central guideline for international standards on sexual orientation and gender identity. And the most important part of this is that to claim an identity as a third gender on documents or in any other legal manner, it is based solely on your personal declaration that it is so. And so in Nepal, you file an affidavit and then you go get the documents changed to say so. The point of this being that, like this person you've quoted who I've interviewed, if he defines male one way and female one way and doesn't agree with either one of those, this is available. And who is anyone to tell him that this is not how he can do it? It's a very open category, it's very fluid, and I think in the coming years, as it starts to get actually implemented on the ground, we're going to see people with a wide variety of identities and presentations and appearances start claiming this because it provides them dignity and protection, and that's the goal of the entire thing.
And then my second question is, so why Nepal? In the sense of why South Asia and Southeast Asia. I have other countries here like India, Bangladesh, New Zealand, Australia, and Pakistan, all participating in some type of identification for a third gender. So how is this region of the world more predisposed to this type of LGBTI movement than, say, the West?
It's an impossible question to answer, but in the Nepali instance, what we can see is that they started their movement in the middle of the country's civil war. A lot was changing. The Blue Diamond Society was officially founded in 2001. The war went from 96 to 2006. There was a lot of chaos. There was a lot of violence on the streets. Even though the war didn't come to the capital city of Kathmandu until a little bit later, there was still a high security presence. There were a lot of people out of work. And people came out at that time, even if it was in whispers, because the country was in a little bit of a chaotic period. Also in Nepal, unlike a lot of other countries around the world that we see, homosexual conduct was not outlawed, so they weren't fighting against that. So what they did is open it up a little bit more broadly and said, okay, what can we ask for? What should we look for? And a lot of the understanding of sexuality and sexual orientation is phrased in terms of gender. And so in terms of developing a third gender category or developing that as something they wanted to advocate for, it made sense in terms of the people, the presentation, the way that they identified outside of this binary of male and female. And the discussions that they had leading up to Yogyakarta, which they had a representative there participating in those meetings, and then for their own Supreme Court decision, led to them speaking about the idea of sexual orientation and gender identity and what they wanted to claim in terms of claiming a space in this third intermediary category.
So I have another quote here that I pulled from one of your numerous blogs on the subject. It's from Rosanna Flammer-Calder, and she said that no longer can the naysayers point out and say that this LGBTI is a Western phenomenon. How does this resonate with you?
Oh, I think it makes perfect sense. And in fact, she said that, and I quoted her in that piece I wrote a few months before Hillary Clinton went and said it in her famous speech in Geneva. And Hillary Clinton only pointed to 5 countries in her speech other than the US, and one of them was Nepal, this tiny little country in the middle of nowhere in Asia. And which was a pretty monumental occasion for people there. It made headlines in the local papers when the Secretary of State from the United States gives credit to Nepal for the incredible activism and progress that's taken place. Is that true? Yeah. I mean, there are people who live non-heterosexual, non-gender binary lives all over the world. Whether they fall into some acronym of LGBTI, throw a Q on, whatever works, whatever doesn't work, they might use different names to refer to themselves, they might understand it in a different way, but ultimately, yes, people like this exist all over the world, and in terms of claiming human rights, there's different barometers of progress. Nepal has done an extraordinary job on paper. There's been some amazing advances along the way, and they're still working to implement those in the everyday lives of the people there.
Now, according to the World Bank, Nepal has a GDP of 18.88 billion and a population of 30.49 million. Do you think this low income status and this modest population has kind of allowed Nepal to focus in at the domestic level on these social issues, since they aren't, one would say, a large participant in the international realm?
Well, they are a large participant in the international realm, just not in the way that we're thinking of them sort of taking a stand at the UN. Instead, they're heavily influenced by donors. A lot of the budget comes from American money or British money or Indian money coming into the country to fund various programs. This is one of the things that the LGBT activists did from day one very successfully, was network and liaise with the embassies that were there and some of the HIV prevention programs and say, okay, we're going to target the LGBT population as well. And while we have this conversation about HIV prevention prevention, condom usage, things like that. We're also going to talk about human rights and that we can actually organize around this. So yes, they do have, it is an extremely poor country. It is very isolated geopolitically, but it is an actor in its own way, even if it happens not to have an enormous embassy in New York and give big speeches in Geneva. They do have their own type of influence, and you see it trickling up as well. For example, the U.S. Embassy in Kathmandu allows people to identify as male, female, or other on visa applications to the U.S., which is a direct result, as far as I'm told by folks who work at the consular section, of the Blue Diamond Society activism on the ground. So it is truly grassroots in that sense when it's coming up from a small country influencing the rest of the world.
And that's completely inspirational because you see where these social movements are able to work from the grassroots level and create kind of a worldwide, soft power movement. And that's just, it's inspirational. I can't think of another word. But to move on, with gendered identity shifting in Nepal and going towards this newer identity of a third gender, for those that do fall under the third gender category, are they going to be seeing less harassment or less discriminatory acts against them because they're becoming more legitimized or recognized by the government?
That's a really good question, and there's a lot of different theories, and at this point it's mostly conjecture because it hasn't been implemented. I mean, it was just announced last week that they'll start being able to do this on a comprehensive level. What we've seen in other places, so for example in Thailand, when some schools have opened third gender bathrooms in schools for gender variant people, it's got mixed results. Sometimes it creates some sort of a ghetto for people who don't identify in the binary, and it's a source of targeting, because once you walk into that bathroom, you've outed yourself as someone. So it's going to be interesting to see how this gets carried out on the ground. But one thing in terms of documenting abuse or harassment, discrimination, is we're going to know, because it's going to allow data sets to be built around this. You only can count what you know. This is something that's true all over the world, and this is something that international agencies in Nepal have started recognizing. For example, UNAIDS, the United Nations HIV and AIDS program, has acknowledged that by creating a third gender category, it allows them to track whether their HIV prevention interventions are working with trans people, because they have numbers, they have official documentation. In terms of targeted violence, if you have someone who is harassed or beaten or murdered and it gets recorded as a third gender with the police, then we can start seeing the numbers. We can see, are there patterns? Is this something that's taking place on a much broader scale? And that's going to be really important in terms of targeting the next wave of advocacy on the ground, the next wave of what they can do to really point out that this is happening. Because currently, if let's say a transgender woman is murdered, which happens relatively frequently, a few times a year still on the streets, it gets recorded as male because that's what her birth documents say. So it sort of goes unnoticed, and I think what this category is going to do is open us up to a slightly more nuanced set of data and information about what's happening, which will be very important going forward.
Now, with all that's been said, what is next for Nepal in this movement, in this LGBTI movement, in this third gender movement? And then further, as we talked about, there's soft balance power within the region. What should we expect for South Asia and in that region?
Part of it is what I was just saying with by adding a third gender category comprehensively on documents and data sets, we're going to start seeing what it's like to divide by three, what it's like to look at this. And we know that women's rights advocates have worked for years to get just a second category on various forums and data sets around the world. So it's going to be very interesting and important to see how this plays out on the ground. And similarly, what it's like for people who carry these documents. Does it make them targets? Does it subject them to more harassment? And that's going to play itself out, and hopefully no one will get hurt, but we're going to get to see what the experience of folks are as they pursue this. Nepal currently does not have a government. They have a caretaker cabinet with a prime minister, but the parliament dissolved last May, and this included Asia's first openly gay federal level politician who's the leader of Blue Diamond Society. He was a member of this parliament. So they need to have elections, and one of the cool things that's going to happen is I think we're going to see more LGBT people step up to run for office in his wake. They saw that he was successful. They saw that by having him in the chamber, some of the small laws changed along the way, which sort of happens around the world. People, when you have an LGBT person in the chamber, laws tend to sort of slowly trickle into place.
I cannot wait to see what's in store for the future, not just within the region, but how this affects the world over, So again, I'll be following you, and we all will here on at Gay Report LA, and we'll just be eager to be checking in with you, see the status of Nepal and the LGBTI movement. So thank you.
Did it surprise you that Nepal has become a recognized leader for LGBT rights?
Actually, I was. With Nepal having a low GDP and a rather modest population, and in addition to a very small landmass, I was very surprised to hear that the progressive movements going on within Nepal have been able to move up the ladder in international politics to affect human rights and gay rights movements within much larger countries. To hear names like Hillary Clinton internationally recognizing Nepal was so enlightening. It was also very remarkable to hear that Nepal has been able to use soft power and cultural influence unintentionally, leading by example and leading the world into a new vision for universal human rights that include LGBT rights, despite its small size, TJ.
Elliot, thank you so much for bringing this story to us and for your excellent work. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Sure. Thank you. And yes, I would like to quote Hillary Clinton. Gay rights are human rights, and human rights are gay rights. Stories like this only demonstrate that even further, TJ.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much, Elliot.
Thank you, TJ.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Gay Report. Join me again next week for more news and events affecting your world. And until next time, stay proud, America.